Welcome, champions, to the next overview and tier list ranking, featuring the newest champion. This is where we'll break down their mechanics and place them in my overall tier list for every champion in the game. So let's talk about Shadowheart, who we'll be abbreviating for the rest of this video as Shart, the lawful neutral half-elf cleric in Seat 6, and newest member of the Absolute Adversaries, meaning she's got that tadpole digging around in her brain. Like the rest of the Absolute Adversaries, she comes from the hit RPG Baldur's Gate 3, where Shadowheart serves two purposes: healing the party and wearing lingerie. Here she serves the group as a healer and support. Being a cleric, Shadowheart draws from her cantrips for her primary attack, Sacred Flame, hitting a random enemy with a hit of normal damage. Her ultimate has her raise her unique artifact, we won't talk about how she got that, which flies into the air and sends out a circular pulse, dealing damage to all enemies and knocking them back, and then also makes your slotted champions immune to all damage for 10 seconds, or until you change areas. Her main damage buffing formation ability is Twilight Trickery, which will affect all champions within 2 slots of her. And of course, if you know anything about the Absolute Adversaries, you know that she's coming with another stack of Ceramorphosis, which will in turn scale up the other Absolute Adversaries now that she's arrived. And as they are all so far pre-stack multiplicative bonuses, this is quite important. In this case, as well as adding another Ceramorphosis stack to your formation, Shadowheart herself also increases the buffing power of Twilight Trickery for each current Ceramorphosis stack in your formation. Her healing comes from Light in the Dark, which very simply heals the champions in the 2 columns in front of her. We're looking at standard healing numbers here, so as usual, nothing to get excited about. One day, we'll get another percentage-based healer. Lastly, she has Invoke Duplicity, where she will create an illusory duplicate of herself, which hides in the formation and attaches to the champion slotted in your formation with the highest dexterity. The duplicate will, duplicate both Twilight Trickery and Light in the Dark at half of the normal distance. So Twilight Trickery will be applied to those within 1 slot of the duplicate, and Light in the Dark will be applied to those 1 column in front of it. Do note, however, the champion receiving the duplicate will be considered within 1 slot of itself, so they will have Twilight Trickery applied to them as well. Ties for the highest dexterity will go to the champion in the highest numbered seat. So if you have Krydal and Zorbu both with a dexterity of 17, it will always go to Zorbu in seat 12. Now, the most important part of this is that Twilight Trickery and Invoke Duplicity's version of Twilight Trickery are 2 different buffs, so you can double down on it. So, for example, if Zorbu is within the 2-slot range of Shadowheart, and he's within 1 slot of the duplicate, then he will have 2 instances of the damage buff, which are both Social Lightable with Valentine, and then Observable with Artemis. And with Nrak's Wisdom specialization, she is Nrackable as well. With her specialization choices, we have the option of replacing her primary attack with another cantrip, Guidance, which will buff the DPS of your bud-setting champion's next attack for 200%, stacking up to 5 times multiplicatively each time she attacks. Or Sister of Darkness, where if Invoke Duplicity is in the same slot as she is, it will increase the effectiveness of Twilight Trickery by 400%. Or Find Yourself, where the effect of both Twilight Trickery and Light in the Dark are increased by 100%, specifically emanating from the duplicate. For each formation slot away from Shadowheart, the duplicate is, following the shortest path, stacking multiplicatively. Her equipment and feats are dead on average. With her equipment, she has 1 for all damage, 1 for Twilight Trickery and Ceramorphosis for her damage buff scaling, 1 for Light in the Dark, and then the old school 1 for ultimate attack damage and ultimate cooldown. Having 1 for healing and ultimate damage instead of scaling her specializations feels kinda bad, but oh well. Her feats are as simple as they come, a few with all champ damage and an assortment of buffing her formation abilities. Nothing special here, no specialization scaling, attribute bonuses, unique formation tinkering, just the basics. So let's talk about her event, Simril. This year we have Shadowheart, Warduke, and Yorvin. As is often a trend this year, we have a Year 5 that isn't quite up to snuff, with a useful Year 6 and 7. Yorvin has his use as a debuffer and some shenanigans with his danger sense for damage reduction, but he's likely not one you're going to want to be looking to investing in. Warduke, on the other hand, is a great DPS with a fun mechanic to work with, depending on who you ask. So if you're looking for a focus this time around, the question is basically, is your DPS Warduke? If so, him. If not, Shadowheart. Though do keep in mind it is Yorvin's last year before he's retired to only being available through time gates. Now what about her achievement and adventure variants? The achievement is very simple, requiring you to have Invoke Duplicity placed in the same slot as her for 100 areas. Just complete 100 areas with her as the highest dexterity member of your party. Her first variant is also very simple, lining up with her Twilight Trickery, where only champions within 2 slots of her can deal damage, which you'd want to keep them in anyway because of how it works, though she cannot be moved or removed. The second allows her to be moved, but not removed, from your formation and preys on Shadowheart's fears, slotting a wolf in the formation. Champions next to the wolf cannot deal damage with their normal attacks, and every 5 seconds the wolf will bite a champion directly in front of it, dealing 20% of their total health. This encourages you to slot Shadowheart in a position to be able to heal those champions while keeping her in range to buff the damage of your DPS. A slight hassle for early players maybe, but nothing you can't mitigate. The third allows her to be moved but not removed and forces every champion in your formation to have a unique dexterity score. This is limiting in a unique way, but all players should be able to work around it without too much trouble. Her availability isn't the greatest, not available for one of the Trials lockouts, Charisma, and only available for one patron, Vajra, with no attribute feats to counter any of it. At a quick glance, you might think her numbers are low, and though she's a bit complicated, just remember that when you set her up right, she applies her buff as 2 different multiplicative buffs, much like how Nova was before her nerf. This will only get better as we inevitably get the rest of the absolute adversaries for that Ceramorphosis scaling. She really is just good. I'm scooching Lae'zel and Astarion up a smidge, and placing Shadowheart above them both, in the A tier. Thanks for dropping in on me. Leave a comment on what you think of Shart, and what you are hoping to see from the rest of the Tadpole crew in the near future. No spoilers unless you make it very clear that they are. But as always, there is one and only most important thing. Have a hell of a time out there, champion.